Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here then please do me a favour and hit that subscribe button. Got some more NFL draft content today from my conversation with draft expert Jack Brentnall. In this segment we speak about what position groups are the strengths and weaknesses in the 2025 draft. Some really insightful stuff from Jack in this discussion, and just a great breakdown of the position groups overall. Just before I jump into it, you can find the links to Jack's socials in the description, so make sure you go and follow all the awesome work that he does. I'll be releasing the full interview later this week, but for now I hope you enjoy this conversation on the positional strengths and weaknesses in the 2025 NFL draft. With that being said about the quarterbacks, obviously not being exactly a strength of this draft, what position groups kind of as a whole do you see as the strengths of this draft, and then obviously which ones would you see as the weaknesses as well?
Yeah, I'd say biggest strengths for me are probably running back, safety. We're definitely not getting the sexy positions here, and defensive line. And
Yeah,
with that, I'd include interior defensive line and edge. Um, I think the reason I like these three is because they all have studs at the top, at least one. Some of them have more than one. I think I mentioned South Carolina safety, Nicky Manwari earlier. I think he's brilliant. I think he's going to go higher than people think. Running back, I'm a big Trayvon Henderson fan, but there's also like a bunch of other guys there that are really good. Um, Defensive line, we've talked Mason Graham.
yeah,
Walton Nolan is great. I like Derek Harmon from Oregon. That's obviously on the interior. Edge, we've mentioned Abdul Carter. Then there's a bunch of other guys. I'm a massive Shamar Stewart from
yeah,
Texas A&M fan.
yeah,
Um, those feel to me like the best ones because they've got those guys, but there's also depth. Like there's guys I'm looking at all those positions on day two. Certainly running back. I mean, you're
yeah,
talking like there's probably good running backs into day three. I mean, there always is, but like this year particularly,
yeah,
there's guys I'm looking at thinking they'll probably be down top around four, and I think they could be maybe not like a bell cow, but a good part of an NFL backfield.
yeah,
So having that blend of kind of talent at the top, but depth, I think all of those ones take that box.
yeah. You see, that's music to my ears as a Browns fan. We need a running back pretty urgently. It's been quite a hard pill to swallow, of course, with the Nick Chubb
Mm-hmm.
stuff. I know some Browns fans out there are still kind of clinging on to the idea that maybe he can return to his former self. I'm doubtful. I think the Browns need to really invest into their run game this year. And as you mentioned, the running back prospects this year seem to be pretty deep. I've got my eyes on Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. I just think he would fit the Browns. I mentioned earlier about what they're trying to do, more of that West Coast zone blocking scheme. I just think he'll really fit in well with us. But as you said, I think there's, whether they decide to go early day two or even later day two and potentially even day three, I think there's studs to be found in this running back class, which of course is massive for the Browns. Defensive line and safety as well. I've probably got defensive line as the Browns' number one need on defense, purely just rotational bodies they need to bring in there, and of course with Miles, if he's going to be going, they need to kind of rebolster that defensive line, and then safety as well. I'm fed up of the Browns trying to do the whole free agent avenue for safeties. They tried it with John Johnson, they tried it with Juan Thornhill. I don't expect him to be back the next year at all. So I'm kind of in the camp of let's just draft one of these guys, develop them, and hopefully they can become the long-term starter at that safety position. So that is, of course, good to hear as a Browns fan. What about the offensive line? Where would you kind of include that into this?
So I ummed and ahed about where the offensive line sits, right? Because um, I think there's quite a lot of talent, but more than any other year, this feels like one where there's so many of the guys that we're talking about where they fit best. Are they a tackle? Are they a guard?
Yeah,
You know, um, there's so much of that. Um, if you're the kind of team who just goes, I need offensive line help, there's plenty of guys. If I was a team that was saying, "Oh, I need my franchise left tackle," there's guys I like, but I don't think it's necessarily as strong as some other years have been. I think for me the best offensive lineman in the class is LSU's Will Campbell. He obviously played left tackle in college. Um, I think he's a guard in the NFL.
Yeah,
I think he can play tackle, and I'd probably give him a shot at tackle. I think his best football is at guard. He struggled a bit in space, and he has some length question marks. I just think, but also he's insanely. He's the kind of nasty, you know, proper hard nosed offensive lineman you want on
yeah,
the interior.
a
So I
mover.
like that kind of attitude on the interior.
Yeah,
I'm a big Tyler Booker fan, who's the guard from Alabama.
yeah,
I think he's gonna. I saw that Daniel Jeremiah had him top 10 in his mock draft, which was reassuring because I've had him graded a true first round grade since I watched him, and I'm
yeah.
am I missing something here? Because I don't think that many people seem to be talking him up. Um, but outside of that, there's some real weaknesses. I think there's the center class is not great. Um, there's guys who are maybe going to be converted to center, but again, you're guessing a bit there as to what they'll be. Yeah, there's not a lot of. It feels like a mixed up class. If I need talent, great, but if I need a specific role filling,
Yeah.
I'm maybe not feeling as good.
And is that talent kind of widespread? Do you think is it similar to the running backs where you could probably get a maybe potential future starter in late day two, day three, or do you think it's kind of top heavy the talent in the offensive line?
I think certainly on the interior, there's guys on day two that you'll be able to kind of that will be good starters. I think there's a few guys who showed out at the Senior Bowl who may now have raised their stock that kind of maybe I thought would be borderline top 50 who are maybe going to rise up a little bit now. But yeah, I mean there are guys I like further down the board. NC State offensive tackle Anthony Belton is like a
Yeah,
man mountain who was really good at Senior Bowl. Um, he'll probably go, I don't know, maybe third or fourth round. I think there's something there. But offensive tackle, you're generally if there are the top ones, and if we're talking true offensive tackles, there's a few that are, I think, good bets to go first round, but they always go early. Finding up unless you're Green Bay, finding a starting offensive tackle
yeah,
on in the later rounds is tricky.
yeah. I mean, we've tried it in the first round, obviously with Jed Wills. 2020 looked like that might be a great pick. Now,
Mm,
not so much
yeah,
due to become a free agent. I would be shocked if they brought him back. DeJuan Jones obviously was a revelation as a rookie. Took a slight step back last year. How much of that was influenced by the injury, I'm not so sure. But I think I think it's good because I'm in the boat that the Browns need to revamp the whole offensive line. As I mentioned, 2020 was historic. That unit, they were incredible. But I think because of that, the last few years, people that maybe aren't as kind of clued in with the Browns kind of just go, yeah, that offensive line is great. It's not. It's not at all. There's been
mm,
cracks in this offensive line, in my opinion, since 2020. And it's just kind of getting old now. You look at the interior, Wyatt and Joel. Joel might retire. Wyatt's getting pretty old and expensive, and obviously I mentioned about the tackles. The only one position they do have is a centre, so thankfully, thankfully that's how you described it. But so I think that could be a positive for the Browns in terms of, I think they kind of need to get multiple guys in this draft. As I mentioned earlier, they've got 11 picks. That might even increase. So obviously a complete revamp on the offensive line would be needed. So, but obviously with them not being the top guys, they're never going to draft one at two. So
no,
it's always about who's going to be there day two for me. And as you kind of mentioned, maybe there is some guys that they could get in there day two that could fill that role, which is of course good to know. So finally on positionals, kind of ranking, what would you say are the weakest position other than quarterback, as we mentioned? What would you say are the weakest?
yeah, quarterback is obviously the one. Yeah, center isn't great. I think that I wouldn't say this is a weak one, but it's maybe worth just kind of touching on here. cornerback is a weird one,
Yeah,
right? I, I'm not sure I'd say it's a weakness, but it's so there's a bunch of guys that are really talented and have great tape, but they almost all of them have like some fairly substantial injury question marks. So Will Johnson from Michigan, Savon Ravel from East Carolina, and Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame. Their tape is brilliant. If you watch any of their tape, you'll be like, "Oh, this guy's great. Like this guy should go high." And they've all had injuries. Morrison in particular has had shoulder surgery and he's had hip surgery, which for a cornerback really worries me. Now, obviously, for the Browns, there's not much of a need for cornerbacks, so this will be another sigh of relief moment. Um, but it's just an odd one. Like it feels like it could be the kind of class where there's a bunch of guys that you know actually all end up being great, but it could be the kind of one where some of these names really fall in the draft, and it kind of doesn't end up being what people maybe thought it would be if you go
yeah,
back 6 months. Where I think this cornerback class would, if you'd asked in the summer, cornerback felt like it was definitely one of the biggest strengths, but
yeah,
it doesn't seem to have materialised.
yeah. I mean, there's been some rumblings about Denzel Ward potentially also wanting out if Miles leaves, which of course would be a massive loss for the Browns. This might be the last year with Greg Newsome. I can't see them, going too expensive with that extension. So, but that's kind of where I come back to Travis Hunter, I think, because that's the kind of luxury on that, isn't it? That you can have that player that you can play at wide receiver, and then down the line, if you do need a slot corner or you do need to someone to kind of fill that role on the outside, then he can go and do it.
Yeah,
Um, Finally, on positions, wide receiver is one that has been puzzling me quite a lot. Everything I try and kind of find out about these guys, I hear that the top end is quite thin compared to, let's say, the last few years with some of just the incredible prospects we've had coming into the NFL at the wide receiver position, what feels like a decade now. But then on the kind of flip side of it, everyone's telling me that the depth is really good in this wide receiver class. So I don't really know where to lie on it. But it's a position definitely in need for the Browns. They've of course got Jerry Jeudy, who unbelievable breakout year last year. I've got faith in him as their wide receiver one. But outside of that, I mean, I think there's only one other guy they've got rostered next year that's had more than 12 receptions in the NFL. So they're going to have to bring in experience, but they're of course also going to have to draft a guy just for bodies. And this Browns regime loves drafting day three wide receivers. So what's your kind of thoughts on this wide receiver class as a whole? Does that make any sense, kind of what I've said, or do you think it's different to that?
yeah, no, it does. I've just finished doing my kind of final wide receiver film grades this year, so I've got through 20 guys so far. There'll probably be a few more I kind of add on. I think there's depth in the class. I think it's one of those where like I wouldn't class wide receiver as a strength or a weakness of the class. It just feels kind of solid. Um, Travis Hunter's my wide receiver one. Um, you've got two other guys in the class who I think can be the kind of, you know, the guy you build your passing game around potentially. In Luther Burden, who's my wide receiver two from
Yep.
Missouri, and Ted McMillan from Arizona, who I have as wide receiver three,
Yep.
who seems to probably be the consensus wide receiver one in the class at the moment. Now, I like those guys. I think if you go back last year, I don't think any of them are going ahead of Malik Neighbours. Um, there's maybe a conversation to be had when you get to like the Romadunze type guys, but yeah, it doesn't feel like there's a guy you go, oh, he is going to be like, all pro receiver. Travis Hunter would be my bet, and I do
Yeah.
think he's great, and I think he's got that potential. But there's still room for growth as a receiver. Um, the good thing for the Browns is if you need a really good wide receiver too, um, there's quite a few guys I think are really good. Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. Obviously, you're an Ohio State fan, so you'll
Yeah.
know how good he is. He's like the safest wide
Yeah.
receiver in the class. Good athlete, great route runner, good hands. I don't. I have some questions if he's ever going to be like a 100 target guy in the NFL. But like if you have him as your wide receiver 2, you're doing like incredible. I think he
Yeah.
could be a wide receiver 1 in a pinch, but like I think he's like a high level wide receiver 2 for me. A few other guys I like Jack Besh from TCU,
Yep.
Elekai Mana from Stanford, Matthew Golden from Texas has been getting a lot of love. I don't quite see the first round hype that he's been getting from some,
Yep.
but like if the Browns maybe decided with that pick at 33 they wanted to go for a receiver, I think there's real value there. Third round, there's probably still some guys that are good. And there's a few really good athletes. The one guy, if I'm picking like a really intriguing prospect, is Isaiah Bond from Texas. Because he is one of the best athletes in the class. I say one of. There's a Arian Smith from Georgia is like, almost like professional level track speed. But like
Yeah.
other than him, Hunter is lightning quick, really great stop-start ability, really good yak threat, good hands, better route runner than he's given credit for, but like it never really materialized in college. He dealt with injuries at Texas. Like if you told me in 5 years' time that Isaiah Bond was like a high-level NFL wide receiver, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah.
But if you told me he like never materialized into anything, I also wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah.
So like he could be, if you're looking like round 2 or 3, I don't know where he'll go, probably round 2. He could be an intriguing one, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, as I mentioned, there's not quite the Malik Neighbors or the Marvin Harrison Juniors or the Jamar Chases coming out this year, but that doesn't mean there's not value to be found. Interesting that you've got Tet as your third guy. I've seen a lot of people, I think just because of maybe how this draft is, but him getting mocked in the top 10 does seem a bit of a stretch to me, but I think it's more the traits, isn't it? The size, kind of what he offers, kind of that unicorn-esque kind of physical profile at the wide receiver position. Amita Ibuka is an interesting one, and I think wide receiver 2 is a great. I mean, he was a wide receiver 2 in college. This isn't a guy that is going to be coming in as a wide receiver 1 and is going to be going, "Whoa, what's going on here? Where's my 100 targets?" He's used to it. He's played with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jeremiah Smith, two of the, in my opinion, best wide receiver prospects I've ever seen. So for him to play behind them and be successful, he is Ohio State's all-time leading receptions leader. So just a really solid prospect for me. Do you think he goes in the first, or do you think he slips into the second?
I wouldn't be surprised if it was somewhere kind of back end of the first round. Like I said, it's a kind of thinner class maybe at the top, so it might bump some of those second tier guys up a little bit. But I think he'll be somewhere in that kind of 20 to 40 range for me.
Yeah.
I don't see him going any higher.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong.
So overall, positional strengths this year, I think you kind of on the same as me here. Running back, defensive line, safety. You can maybe argue DB as a whole, but as you kind of mentioned, the corner class has kind of maybe fallen a little bit. And then obviously the biggest weakness is quarterback, I think stands out the most. And then, as we kind of said, it's not so much that the wide receiver position and maybe some of these other positions aren't necessarily weaknesses, but it's just a bit thinner at the top compared to some of the other positions. As you mentioned with D-line and running back, it's not just that it's the depth, but it's also the top guys at the top as well, which kind of promote them up. So just to give my quick final thoughts, it was good to see Jack echo, my sentiment in the running back and defensive line classes this year being pretty good. Both position groups have, potential top-end talent as well as good depth as well, which are, both roles the Browns are looking for. I've spoken about how the Browns need to try and, find a new starting running back, which I think they can find in this draft. The Browns also need both top-end talent at defensive line, someone like an Abdul Carter, to be a good long-term partner next to Miles, or even potentially, take his place if Miles is to get his wish and be traded. seeing Jack be pretty high on the safeties this year was also pretty interesting. I said in my positional needs video that I'm tired of the Browns trying to address their free safety position with, free agents, and I'm ready to just draft and, try and develop a guy instead. So I do think as, maybe somewhat of a wild card, safety could be in play within their first 3 picks. Jack also seems to be higher on, this offensive line class as a whole, maybe more so than I am. Not so much with the top guys, but he does think that there's good depth if you are just looking for offensive linemen in general versus, needing a starting left tackle in the first round. Whilst the Browns, obviously do need a starting left tackle, I do also think they need to revamp their offensive line as a whole. If there is good depth to be found in this year's offensive line class, then, the Browns can look to address their urgent need for a tackle in free agency and then just take multiple swings, on the offensive lineman on day 2 and 3 in the draft. Who knows, maybe one of those guys, fingers crossed, develops into a long-term starter one day. Overall, other than the quarterbacks, there wasn't really any position groups that, stood out as glaringly weak during mine and Jack's conversation. So just pretty standard Cleveland Browns luck that, they had the 2nd overall pick, but don't have Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels or Drake May waiting for them. But who knows, maybe the Browns do take a quarterback at number 2 and they turn out to be great. I'm a Browns fan, so I doubt it, but you can never say never. But that would do it for me today, guys. If you do enjoy my content, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and as I always say, even if I only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys. Have an amazing rest of the week, but most importantly, go Browns.